Hi there, this is David Drury, and you're listening to the Not That Kind of Christian podcast. This is where we take on tough questions with heart, humor, and hope, and we're trying to make sense of everyday life and our faith in the middle of it all. Today, we're reflecting on our places of work as Christians. So, as I think about it, some Christians seem to think that what really matters for their faith is Sundays. We worship on Sunday and Monday through Saturday. Well, our faith doesn't seem to impact that as much. Many Christians kind of keep them separate in their lives. But my guests today are not those kinds of Christians. First, I have Steve Deneff, the pastor at College Wesleyan Church. Welcome to the pod, Steve.
Thank you, Dave.
Good to have you here. And also Hannah Lindsay, who's a teacher at Francis Slocum Elementary School, also in the same city there with College Wesleyan Church. Good to have you here as well, Hannah.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So let's get into this conversation. So we want to talk about how God's at work in the marketplace. He's at work at our work, you might say. And this is a key issue that's close to our hearts, the three of us. And I imagine everybody that's listening that has a place of work or a career that they think of, this is something you might have wondered, like, how does this impact my work? So let's start here. Start with Steve. Maybe you can reflect on this. What awakened you to how God's moving in our places of work and how important this is for you as a pastor to talk about and think about and help your people understand?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. I have to go back maybe 10 or 12 years. There was really the convergence of a few things that were all happening from different angles. One of those was I was reading an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal one day talking about unemployment in the United States. It was written by Peggy Noonan, used to write speeches for presidents. In that article, she said, the problem with unemployment is a spiritual problem, not an economic one. I couldn't believe I was reading that in something like the Wall Street Journal. So I finished reading the art, and the point she was making was when a person is not able to work, something in them suffers spiritually, not just economically. They start losing purpose and direction for their life. Now, that seems self-evident, but it wasn't at the time. So I stored that away, and then it wasn't long after that, I started having multiple conversations with people in my church. They were in their early 30s. Most of them had already accomplished by this age what their fathers had accomplished in their 60s. And they still had 35 to 40 years on the clock yet. So they start coming in, talking to me saying, I don't know what to do with the rest of my life. I've got at 35 what my dad had at 65, and I got all this time and all this passion, but I don't know what to give it to. I started putting that together by just listening to them, and I started watching people talk about what was happening in their workspace, and I went back to the Word of God, and I started to study what place does work have in a person's life in a world that God designed. And from that, created a series of thoughts on work and faith called Whatever You Do. Paul says, whatever you do. And he said this to lay people, whatever you do it all for the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. So that meant all of our work could be done as a sacrifice to Jesus Christ. And that shaped our congregation. At the end of that, 388 people came onto the platform to be commissioned as missionaries into the places where they live, work, and play. And so the last 10 years at College Church has really been trying to unpack what that means, helping people find their calling, developing them in that calling, and then celebrating what God is doing through their ministry in very different occupations.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I've been able to watch some of that journey from afar and hear about it. Hannah, talk to us about, in your context or in your experience, 7 years in a school and as a teacher and leading in that space. What was your awakening? When did you start to connect this faith and work?
Yeah, I think I got to benefit a lot from what Pastor Steve was saying, like being a part of the congregation, hearing that. And I've always believed that teaching is my calling. But on year 3 of teaching, it was my worst year ever. And I was like, oh, can I be in a calling that I'm not good at, or I can't keep going? And so it was just a constant battle that year. It was a spiritual battle. I had to make an active decision every day to go to work and give my best, even when I was seeing what felt like no fruit. But God really met me in that really challenging season. And from then on out, I was able to not just see my students. Sorry, my lights go off after 20 minutes. I'll get them in a minute. Uh, but I used to just be good at loving my students well, but I didn't necessarily have the capacity to love my coworkers to the same extent. I was giving so much to my students that I felt like that was all I could give. But that summer, I was able to refresh and rest. And from then on out, I've been able to not just love on my students, but to intentionally love my coworkers. And I have seen the biggest impact in my joy and my mental health. When I go home, I'm excited to come to work, and it's been able to create more of a family feel at work.
Well, that's
Beautiful.
great, Hannah. And I mean, part of what I think you're highlighting is I could see a lot of people having that. You mean like maybe a nurse or doctors that work with people that are sort of here, our institution is here to help these people and do that well, and then not treat their peers that are doing the
Yeah.
work well. And so that more holistic way of looking at the environment you're in seems that's a great way to be looking at it. So,
One of the
yeah, go ahead, Steve.
one of the first things that we had to work on, Dave, when we talked about integrating faith and work, was trying to learn how to go to work and look around, and not just look at our work. Like what Hannah just said, the tendency is to go to your work with kind of a tunnel vision, and I'm here just to do my job. The calling is not just the job. The calling is the people in the job that Hannah just said. That's the calling. So helping people identify who are the people that you come into contact with every day. You don't have to try to meet them. They're already there. That they already come to you for advice, or they want your input on something. They're looking for something from you. Recognize that and begin to pray for those people by name. That was the first step. Identify the people, pray for them by name. And then when you pray for people, you see things that you didn't notice before because you're praying for them. And that's where the ministry starts to get traction.
Wow. Yeah. So Hannah, tell me more about what you've seen happen. Maybe a story of what that's looked like in your context, where you've seen God at work, or you've seen, you talk a little bit about how you changed. How did it change
Yeah.
there?
Well, I would say that year after my really challenging year, or maybe it was 2 years after, I took over hosting prayer in my classroom for any teachers or staff who wanted to join every Friday morning. And that first year, it was me and the social worker meeting faithfully every Friday. It was just the two of us, and we'd pray over students, each other, whatever we needed. The next year, it doubled, so there was a steady 4 of us meeting. And then this year, it's been 8 to 15 people every single week, and just
Neat.
being able to debrief our week and pray for specific students or specific situations. And it's just created a place of belonging for people who maybe wouldn't come to prayer or wouldn't come to church, but just feel like they need it in our context. And it's been really special to see God at work in that.
Nice. You do that on Fridays, you said?
Friday mornings before
Friday
work.
morning. So it's the end of the week. I mean, I know for anyone, and this is really everyone that has gone to school, you get to Friday and you're like, oh, I'm so ready for Saturday.
Yep.
But I'm sure teachers feel the same way, and so's workers. And so what a great thing. Let me ask you this, though, because I'm sure it's delicate, because not all of the people that work at your school are Christ followers, or others may be, and they're really... Some people get really panicky about talking about religion and faith, and especially when you're at a public school. So how do you manage and navigate that trickiness? Because everyone I've ever talked to about faith and work in almost any context talks about that challenge.
Yeah, I've been so thankful to have great support from the leaders at my school. And then College Wesleyan pours so heavily into our school, which I think opens the door to just meet people where they're at. And I think that's the goal of Friday prayers. It's more to meet you where you're at. Like if you need to debrief your week, sometimes I think people come more for that than the actual prayer piece. But then they also get it. They get the spiritual piece because they need a space to vent or process, where we all get it. We have shared experiences and we can empathize and understand different than somebody at home could.
Nice. And Steve, Hannah mentions the investment of your church in that specific school because it's so close to the church. But you don't invest in every school like that in your county. You don't invest surely in every business or medical facility, or, there's all kinds of places you don't have like a formal program with. So what do you do as a pastor to help equip your people to be inspired by what Hannah's doing without all the infrastructure to make it seem like easier, that it's attached to something? Maybe it's just some guy or some gal that's at some company and they would like to do a Friday prayer time like Hannah just talked about, but they're going to be the first one to ever have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that's an important question, I think, because a lot of pastors are asking that same question right now. How do I mobilize a body to do this out of nothing? Like, we don't have anything right now. How do we get started? Some of the things that we did at the start, which I thought were critical to this, I started making site visits. I just had the office call different people at work and say, can I come to your work and have a conversation with you in your workspace? And they would say, why do you want to come to my workspace? I'd say, well, you come to mine every Sunday, so can I come to yours sometime during the week? I want you to walk me through what you do. So I'd walk through factories, I'd walk through offices, locker rooms, boardrooms, sometimes living rooms, and just say, I would ask a series of questions. Talk to me about what happens in this space. Talk to me about the calling that has put on your life. And to have people walk you through a public school, show you the whole sequence of the day when the students come, it's a principle, and say, talk to me. How do you pray for these students when they come? Well, two things are happening there. He's showing me his work, but I'm also, by my questions, I'm helping him frame his work in the language of a calling. So the site visits became critical for us. Then we mobilized the staff to do the same thing. We wrote 3 questions that staff would take into any workspace, and they could interview those people. I think we sent about 18 to 20 staff out. They each had to find 3 different workspaces. So you think about somewhere between 54 and 60 workplaces in the county are being covered over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. So that's one of the things I would encourage pastors continue to teach on this and preach on it, because this needs a theological and a biblical base. Otherwise, it's going to seem like another program. Another thing they can do is they can shoot videos in the workspace. They can ask workers to bring testimonials into the morning worship service so they model it in front of the body. Tell us what you're doing when you coach that team, Bob, things of that sort. One of the things we do at College West every Sunday is we don't end with a benediction, we end with a sending. It's something like, we have gathered in the name of Christ. Now we go out in the name of Christ. You are sent, right? So people never feel like the service is over. They feel like Sunday morning is just kind of blending naturally with the rest of their work week.
Yeah, and you mentioned there the idea of using language of calling, equipping people with those questions, which you've got some staff members to do that, but I could imagine a pastor without staff members could equip their board to do that, or equip
Yep.
some of their leadership
Yep.
team, or even family members to say, "Let's do this," or just like you did, actually get out yourself. But Hannah, talk about the concept of calling. You mentioned earlier that you kind of had always felt called to what you're doing, but even now, as you're talking to other people, not just in your school, but outside in other professions, how do you think we can help people really own that idea of calling? Because a lot of people think, oh, calling, that's for pastors like Steve or for the missionaries we support from our church. They're called. I've just got a job. How does that rewire in your head, and how do more people get where you are, where you've seen it as part of your faith calling?
I think it starts as being as simple as just loving the people you're around is your calling. And so whether that's your coworkers or your kids or grandkids, whatever the context may be, you have a 100% chance of impacting others if you love them well, and just meeting people where they're at and just not comparing to what other people are doing around you, because that's when it can get tricky or you can feel less than and what you're doing is not important. So just running your race and loving the people around you.
Hmm. Yeah, what I hear in that too is that calling really applies to anyone wherever they are. Like Steve said a moment ago, like whatever you do, and I would add to that kind of whoever you are and wherever you're at would apply to that. In some ways, it's not about even the profession you're called to or the place of work you have. It's that you're called to Christ. And all of us are called to Christ in the same way, and to treat people that well. We do want to take a short break here and mention one of our sponsors for this podcast, and that's Indiana Wesleyan University. IWU has this amazing way of combining faith and learning across everything from nursing to business to education. Great place to be equipped for the marketplace like we're talking about today, or even the ministry like Steve and I were at that place too. But if you're looking for a Christ-centered university that takes your calling seriously, I didn't even cheat and put that in there because of this podcast. Whatever that leads, take a look at discover.indwest.edu. Check out IWU. Great thing. So let's be honest. Some workplaces are particularly hard environments for faith. So, Steve, how do you help your people show God's love to people without getting preachy? Like, how do you as a preacher help your people not to be preachy? They shouldn't probably go in with a Steve Deneff voice into their
Please
workplace from the stage. So how do you help them, or how do you help them not get in trouble, or how do you help them build the connections with people in their place of work in a natural way?
I alluded to it a minute ago. Change the language. I'm trying to think of the guy. I think it was a guy named Werner Erhard. I cannot find the work, but what he said is, if you want to change any organization, you have to change the way people talk to each other. And you have to change the things they talk about. Because then you can have conversations you couldn't have before. So a lot of it is just helping the people in the workspace to see their work as ministry, as calling, as an extension of Jesus's being and doing. So our job is not to live Jesus's life, is what we say. He had a life, and his is now over on earth. It's now in heaven. And it was a perfectly good life. But our job is to live our lives as he would live them. So it's to practice the ways of Jesus as though he were a teacher or a coach or a financial manager or a mother or a retired person. So helping people with language. Another thing that I do um, pretty frequently is when I pray for people in the mornings, because something I know is going on in their lives, I'll stop after I pray and I'll send them a text. And I joke about this because these are not typical texts. These are epistles. So they're long texts that say, I was praying about you this morning, and these are the thoughts that came to my mind. Here's the passage that I was thinking of in connection to you. And then I'll send it to them. And what I found has happened is they have copied that and sent that to other people in their workspace that they're praying for. So it becomes this kind of circular message that started here, but it kind of went around the organization. And so people, I think, find encouragement just by being, I've got one in front of me right now that I sent to someone just a couple days ago because he was going to deliver a state of the business address. It was on a Friday. He's like, I got a big State of the Union address at my business. It's not a Christian business. So I was praying for him that morning, and I just said, here's what I'm praying for. I listed those things, and I was thinking of John chapter 1:5 that says, John was not the light. He was witness to the light. So I called him by name and said, you're not the light. You're just a witness. You can do this. This is not hard. God, it's those kinds of things. So it just helps to elevate people in the morning before their work starts. I'm generally up praying before most of them are out of bed. I go to bed really early and I get up at absurd hours. So it's easy to do.
Yeah, well, and I think part of that, regardless of when somebody would do it, is just honoring their work and knowing about it. I mean, just the fact that you knew that that person was giving that address, which is a stressful day for them in their year. And I mean, for you do addresses all the time, so they probably think it would be no big deal for you. But for them, it's a real unique thing. That's not their primary gig. And they don't have the training experience in doing a thing like that. So important that you are encouraging that. So I think all leaders could have that in mind. But a lot of our listeners most really are not ministry leaders like Steve. They have a job like you do, Hannah. So talk to me about a real job. Like I imagine when you describe, Steve, of going to people's workplaces, I figured they'd welcome you because you only work one day a week, right? That's what they always say.
When I grow up, I want to be like
about
Hannah.
pastors.
I want to be a professional.
So So Hannah, talk from that view. What are some ways that a lot of times we think of bringing God to these places. So how have you instead had a mentality of like seeing how God's already at work there? I mean, you're working with children in that space, and so maybe it's a little bit more tender and a little more hard at the same time. But how does that factor in as opposed to like we're bringing Jesus to the school instead of having that attitude, having an attitude of joining what God's already up to?
I think sometimes for me, I just have to step back and do a little breath prayer and just have the space to see God in the little details, like maybe in a smile of a student or kids who never getting along, or thinking about my coworkers. Just, wow, they usually aren't this excited to be here and they're really excited today. And so just seeing God in the little details instead of always the big picture, because if you look back on your day, it's like, ooh, that could have been a really rough day. But if you think of a few small things that go really well, you're going to notice them. You just have to have eyes to see them.
Yeah. And so, in supporting what you're doing, Hannah, you're a part of really a network of other people that care about their place of work in your community. And that's some of what's been birthed. It's why I wanted you all to talk about this on the pod as opposed to just any other church. As that's emerged, Hannah, how has that supported you? Like What's going on up there in Marion in terms of multiple businesses, multiple leaders, multiple people like yourself in other places of work? What's going on? How are you connecting with each other? How are you supporting each other? It's not just Steve. He's a part of that and an important person as the pastor, but how are your peers in other domains of work encouraging each other? And how does that encourage you and help you?
I think of my small group specifically of people who are nurses, work maybe at Indiana Wesleyan, different things, and just coming together and listening to their hearts and their celebrations and to being each other's biggest encouragers and cheerleaders and praying intentionally over and for each other and having confidence that God is already moving even when we're not in the victory season. Like, we are claiming the victory for what's next and knowing the best is always yet to come. And I think specifically in Marion, God's moving in big and small ways. You just have to choose to see them.
Yeah. So Steve,
Beautiful.
maybe elaborate on some else that's going on too, of where some of the people in the marketplace are influencing each other and you aren't even involved, where it's sort of sparking where someone's influencing somebody else. Is that happening?
Yeah. We've put together cohorts of people, sometimes from the same discipline. So all of the teachers here, all of the financial managers, all athletics and things
Okay,
of
because
that
they're
sort.
really thinking their profession
Yep.
is the relatable part.
Yep.
Like, so like Hannah's, obviously her small group, she would know nurses and stuff that she talks and other people in other professions, but really
Yep.
connecting with other people in the schools get it like she does in that context. So would somebody in other things you're mentioning. Keep going.
So, like, Hannah could speak to this. If you step into a room full of educators, for instance, they have all of these acronyms that they refer to, like it's shorthand for tests or programs or laws or something from the DOE. And a layman like me stands in that room and just thinks, "Man, you guys are speaking Coptic. I don't know what you're saying." If you put all the teachers together, they all know the meaning of these same words. They can start in the middle of the conversation. And you can start talking about how do you walk the line between church and state when you want to share your faith, but you can't initiate the conversation. Nobody knows that like a teacher. The last thing you do is put a preacher into a room like that. He doesn't know anything about it. So convene people of like occupation and let them think together, talk about the same obstacles. They all want the same things, and they face the same barriers. So let them do that around your
Makes
county.
sense.
So that's one of the ways. Another one of the ways, I would say to pastors right now, and I don't say this often, but it's let them impress you. Pastors think that people want to be encouraged. They get encouraged all the time. What they want to know is that they can do something that you as a pastor have no idea how to do because they're better at it than you are. So your job is to talk to them about their work and tell them that what they're doing is crucial to bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, and you don't know how to do any of it. That's the best thing you can do for them because it elevates them in their workspace.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so we've talked a lot about all these professions and different marketplaces, but Steve, I have a very hard question for you. As pastors talk about this more, what about the people in our churches or in our spheres of influence or families who don't have a marketplace? People who are retired, that are unemployed. I mean, you earlier quoted Peggy Newman talking about being unemployed's a spiritual problem. Does that talking about it in that way make it a guilt problem? What about people on disability, stay-at-home parents? How does this marketplace talk apply to all of them? Which might be a big chunk of every church. In some churches, it's a large chunk. My mother goes to a church where more than half the people are retired in the church. How does it apply to those people who everyone they live around is all retired down in Florida? How does the marketplace apply to people that don't get a paycheck?
Yeah, that's a great question because as you're saying, that the number of people in that category is growing. There's more of them now than there used to be.
It's
The
because all
short
you
answer.
boomers are getting old and retiring. That's what's
Wait
happening,
a minute,
Steve.
man. I'm not quite a boomer. No,
Yeah.
come on,
Okay.
man. J- Uh, j- there's a Dave. I think the short answer is to say, remember, the ministry isn't the point. The people are the point. The ministry is the people. Whether you work 60 hours a week, 15 hours a week, or you have no job at all, you have people. There are people around you. Sometimes they're your kids. Sometimes they're your spouses. They're your neighbors. You're in a bowling league with them. There are people within arm's reach that you come into contact with. The ministry starts there. All we're asking you to do is identify 3 of those people who you already have a relationship with. They already talk to you about things they worry about, dream about, are afraid of. There's some level of influence and you're praying for them. Start
Mm,
with that
mm,
and then
mm,
see where God takes it. You don't have to turn this into a big program or your own church plant. You just got to love the people already in front of you.
mm, mm. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great. And I think that it's back to a little what Hannah said earlier of when I asked for her stories about her marketplace, she really just talked about the people and the
Yep.
people you're rubbing shoulders
Yep.
with. And you earlier talked about that it's about where you live, play, and work. Well, only one of those involves a paycheck. And we might add to that like study, where you have your hobbies, where you work out, different things like that. And yeah, the marketplace is important and that's part of the calling, but that's not the only thing. Wonderful. Well, I do want to take one more last break to mention the other one of our sponsors for this podcast, and that's Global Marketplace Multipliers, which makes a ton of sense since we're talking about the marketplace a bit today. There's a lot of people out there that have a nudge to the nations, but they don't want to quit their career to become a missionary. But the thing is, it might be your career that takes you around the world and opens doors to access for the gospel for many people that don't have access to the gospel. So if that sounds interesting and resonates with you who are listening right now, check out gponline.org/GMM. That's for Global Marketplace Multipliers. Again, gponline.org/GMM. You might find your mission field is closer than you think. Okay, Hannah, give me a real moment. Maybe it's funny or awkward, surprising, when you were trying to live out your faith at work, or you were trying to do something with your fellow teachers or people that work at school, and it didn't go as planned. How, this sounds great and everything we're talking about is yay, but when has it been like, that didn't go as well as I'd hoped?
Yeah, I think sometimes with our Friday prayers, we spend a little too long debriefing and maybe venting that it rolls over into our arrival time. And we have a pile of kids just walking in my classroom as we are praying, and we get pretty interrupted with the prayer piece. And so it ends up being more just a debrief instead of the spiritual side. And they are pretty funny. They're not going to enter quietly. They're going to be loud and disruptive and want to know what we're doing. So,
An interrupted prayer meeting in a school. That's awesome.
yes.
So Steve, give us some vision. Imagine if you can, what's your city like 10 years from now, fully living into this? Not 100 years from now, just 5, 10 years from now, where people start to see their workplaces as sacred spaces. What's the big dream here?
I think in a sentence, what we've said for a while is we would like everybody in Grant County to be 1 degree from a shepherd, whether they know it or not. There is somebody that they're 1 degree away from that is in the presence of God regularly. If we could have that, then no matter what happens in those persons' lives, they conversations would come up in because they inevitably do, and there would be somebody poised with language and passion to speak into that person's life. Can I tell you a quick story that would paint the
Yeah,
vision?
please.
Is there time? One of these stories, and Dave, we have dozens of these now. One of these stories is a high school basketball coach, secular high school, and he decides to take on this calling. He's going to pray for his players. And the scene is there's a huge rally in the gymnasium because the basketball team, and he's the assistant coach of the guys team, they're getting ready to go off to regionals. School hasn't been to regionals in decades. Everybody's excited. The parents are there. Students have filled the gymnasium. They're going to send them off. The principal starts handing the microphone down to coach after coach after coach, and they all give speeches. They hand the microphone to Matt at the end of the line. He calls himself a Moses-like figure because he doesn't like to lead. He's timid. He takes the microphone and he pauses and he says to the crowd, well, I think all of the words have been taken. So he says, I think the only thing I want to say is every morning when I come into this gymnasium, I walk this track around the gym and I pray for these guys by name. Then he looks at the audience and he says, there's a verse in Zechariah. He starts quoting minor prophets. Then he's quoting major prophets. He told me what he said, and I was like, Matt, he was like, preachers don't even read those books in the Bible, and he's quoting them. He turns and says, if you're a parent of one of these guys, I want you to know that I pray for your sons every morning as I walk that track. Thank you. He hands the microphone back. He gets back to his office and he said, Steve, my phone blew up. I looked at my phone and my first thought was, I've just lost my job. I've crossed the line between church and state. He said, I opened my phone to look at it, and there was a line of texts from parents who said, I never knew anyone was praying for my son.
Mm.
If you have time this week, can I give you a call?
Mm.
I want that right there.
Yeah.
All over Grant County.
Yeah. And one of the things we fail to consider is how non-threatening prayer is.
Yes.
It's so powerful, yet so non-threatening. I have found people that are literally atheists who will be willing for you to pray for them because they think it can't hurt. Literally, they believe it can't hurt, but they're willing for you to send your good vibes, whatever they think is going on there in that moment. So Hannah, on that point, what can the people listening to this podcast, maybe they have not talked a lot about the idea of their marketplace or wherever they live, play, and work and study and so forth, being so important to their faith. How might they take a next step? I mean, you're at a place where this has been a big part of your life for 3-4 years or more, and how you've done your job for 7 years. But how would you say if somebody's right at the beginning there, what's their first next step to faithfully engage in their place of work?
I think creating a safe place for maybe even just one person or a group of people that you work with, and just being really intentional with how you listen, being so quick to listen, slow to speak, and just getting to know them because you are intentionally listening, and then you'll know them and be able to connect with them so much more, to specifically encourage them and to see things that they don't recognize in themselves and speak it into them. And so I think just listening, connecting with others, and encouraging them goes such a long way. I think there's people in my building who probably wouldn't come to prayer, but they're friends with me. So they want to come to prayer on Friday mornings. And part of being a safe place too is knowing that, like, if they are going to open up and tell you something, that it stays there. You're not going to gossip and spread it to the teacher next door or the coworker across the hall. You're going to keep it between the two of you. And I'm with you, telling them that you're going to pray for them. And I like that. It's prayer is so non-threatening. Everybody wants prayer, no matter who they are.
Amen. Amen. Well, I think that's a great place for us to land. It's so great to have both of you with us today. A thank you to Hannah Lindsay, who's a 7-year teacher serving and leading at Francis Slocum Elementary School in Marion, Indiana, the place of my birth, and to Steve Deneff, the lead pastor of College Wesleyan Church. He's the author of Soul Shift, Fault Lines, More Than Forgiveness, and 7 Saving Graces, as well as a mess of other books too. You can catch his sermons at the College Wesleyan podcast. And I should mention 2 efforts that your church has made that are online that might help people that are like, I really would like to roll up my sleeves and get into this more. They have a website called discipleshipatwork.com, discipleshipatwork.com, that has some interesting helps for anyone that wants to get more into this. And they also have some additional resources if you go to collegewes.com/faith and work. And you'll find some of those resources about shepherding that Steve mentioned a moment ago and some of that dream there. And to you, our listeners, or maybe viewers at YouTube or Spotify, thanks for tuning in to Not That Kind of Christian. If you like today's episode, we'd love for you to share it with a friend, give it a review, or generally get it out there into the ether in all the magical ways you do on your cell phone. Check out the more info in the show notes, and you can always find me writing over at daviddrury.substack.com. Big thanks to Seth Strand, our producer, who makes this podcast possible, and to our executive producer, Jamil Acevedo, the executive vice president of Wesley Seminary at Indiana Wesleyan University. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the conversation.